Okay, we are back with chapter 16 of Matthew.
Hi.
Hi. And at the end of 15, I think we had just fed a bunch of people.
Yes, I'm going to go back to 37.
That's relevant. It really is.
And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets full.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, they that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitudes and took ship and came into the coast of Magdala.
Yeah.
So now we're in Magdala.
Yep.
And we are at the start of chapter 16.
And Magdala, as I mentioned, is just a little south of Capernaum on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. All right. But we get into at the start of chapter 16, and the reason that the end of 15 is important because he just did a major miracle.
The second time that he fed a large group of people.
Right. And right before that, he healed a bunch of people.
Yes. And I would suspect that there were people observing that were part of the Jewish leadership.
Well, you would think.
but they proved themselves to be irritants of it all.
They're a little problem. And so now we've got, at verse 1, the Pharisees also with the Sadducees come. Now that is an interesting statement in itself, if you know anything about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They hated each other. They didn't just dislike each other. They absolutely hated each other. These are arch enemies of each other. They have been fighting for a long time.
It's always one believing that the other is more justified, more faithful, more this, more that.
Right. Two different sects of Judaism that didn't like each other.
Yeah, who can puff themselves up more than the other.
Right. But they both hate Jesus so much that they put aside their differences and joined forces to attack him because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, apparently. And
which is a very strange
strange statement to make, but and it does come from the Middle East. That statement does actually come from the Middle East, where these people are at, and we've adopted it. We know what it means. It comes along the line when you'll keep your enemies keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But anyway, but they wanted a sign, and this doesn't go well for them. They come and want a sign. After all of this, after all these miracles, we've got 15 chapters, a couple of years worth of him healing people, raising people from the dead, forgiving sins, healing lepers. This is and now they want a sign. And he says,
and Jesus is becoming more and more short with them, and more harsh.
And he tells them, he said, "You're able to tell whether it's going to be bad weather or good weather based on the color of the sky." When I was in the Marine Corps, and I was on ship, that the sailors taught me, when red sky in morning, sailors take warning. Red sky at night, sailor delight. And because of the color of the sky, which is what Jesus is talking about, they could tell by the color of the sky whether it was going to be good weather or bad weather the next day. And he said, "You're a hypocrite. You can tell you could tell the weather by the color of the sky, but you can't tell the times that you live in, the signs of the time you live in."
And remember, they knew.
And these are biblical scholars. They knew.
They knew what it said, what the prophets had said.
Yep.
They knew all of that. Well.
And so he called them a wicked and adulterous generation that seeks after a sign, but they aren't going to get one other than the prophet Jonah. And you had some words on Jonah.
And I'm going to get to that. But you said that seeks after a sign.
Yep.
If we're seeking not to grow and understand the scripture, what it's telling us, and always seeking the thrill or the excitement or the flash, we're shallow.
You're shallow and you lack foundation.
Yes, and we won't last in the storms. And his reference to Jonah. Jonah is in the Hebrew Bible, and it is part of the book of Navim in the Hebrew Bible, and I'll get to that part in a little bit. Background on Jonah. Jonah, the Hebrew name, meant peaceful being. He was a prophet of the northern kingdom of the 8th century before Christ. Jonah was the son of Amittai, and Amittai was a faithful man, and
which
so
is
was Jonah.
difficult in the northern kingdom, by the way.
Correct. It was a challenge because that really wasn't
It was not a godly kingdom.
No, not at all. And God chose Jonah to go to Nineveh and to prophesy and to give them a chance to turn back to God or be destroyed. We've talked about that before. We talked about how big the city was, that it took days to walk to the center of this city.
Now remember, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, I believe.
Yes.
And they were the arch enemies of Israel. They had conquered and defeated, and they had been at war. They've killed tens of thousands or more of Israelites. They've been at war for a long time. He didn't like the Ninevites.
No. But God found something that he
gave him a chance.
Worthy. And it teaches us that God's compassion is boundless.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you also remember, the sailors were trying to figure out what was happening when the storm happened, because it came up suddenly. And Jonah had to admit he was the cause of the storm, that God was getting his attention. And he told the sailors to throw him overboard, and they did, and the storm stopped. God showed his mercy on those sailors. They did what they were told to do, which was acting in the will of God. Now the Navim are they are part of the Jewish Torah that there are two groups divided up of the prophets. The former prophets was one group. It's Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. The later prophets is Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. They knew them.
Minor, right?
Yes, he was one of the minor. The Pharisees and the Sadducees knew these scriptures well. So they knew when he was making reference to Jonah. One of the references, and we're going to talk a little more, but it was the reference of being 3 days and nights in the belly.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time in the belly of the whale, I mean, he's praying to God, he's talking to God. He's being taken by the whale, that becomes his transport, and then he's spewed up onto the land. And the prayers and the conversation with God was, if I come out of this, I will do what you ask. And he did go to Nineveh, and he did save a city in a nation or a country that had a lot of godlessness, really wasn't following God at all. But God finds those people that he knows the hearts. But I want you to just keep in mind the 3 days and the 3 nights are important.
Which is what Jesus is referring to, specifically in this case. The sign that he was referring to, that the Son of Man, the sign of the Son of Man will be a sign unto them. Jonah was 3 days and nights in the belly of the whale. Basically, he was dead. You don't get in the belly of a fish and live. The fact that he lived for 3 days there is phenomenal.
God's will.
It's God's will. But what he's referring to, and they will see it, he said, it's a sign, it's a prophecy.
He gave them the sign.
He's giving them a sign. The only sign they're going to get, they're not getting until after he dies. Because he will die, he'll be put in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, and he will be raised from the dead. That's their sign.
But he made sure that it was brought to their attention. Okay, you want a sign, you're going to get it.
You're going to get a big one.
But knowing they would not really want that sign.
No, they don't. People that go around and seek after signs usually don't want one. And in this case, he knows they're not. They're just wanting to argue. They're just wanting to cause a problem. They're just wanting to cause dissension. They weren't really wanting a sign. They were wanting to be a problem.
As they had been the whole time.
Yeah, so he just told them that, and then he left. He just quit talking to them. And he just left. And they left, and they went to... Where'd they go? I forget where they went.
It just says they departed, and the disciples came to the other side.
Other side of Galilee, probably.
Yeah.
And he told them to be, and just casually, he told them to be, it wasn't casual, it was a real serious warning, but out of the blue, he tells them to be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Well, they got scared because they thought he was mad at them for not bringing bread. They forgot to bring bread. And he said, and he goes, have you lost your faith? Do you not remember the 7,000 or the 5,000? Do you not remember and how much was left over? If we need bread, I'll make some. We will be fine.
But he was referring to
that.
The Pharisees and Sadducees adding more to God's word than was there. Putting that undue burden, that unjustified, unreasonable, that had nothing to do with faith and fellowship with God. and that he was bringing them back to, I am here to do
Right.
the will of my Father.
And we still have the problem of the, I believe, I've seen it, we still have the problem of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees.
Yes,
It's
we do.
legalism, self-righteousness, and hypocrisy. Those are the leaven. It's dangerous doctrines that are in there that bar the door from people entering the kingdom. And I'll get back to that, by the way.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to get back to that here in a few
And-
verses.
And that's where Jesus' anger comes from. When
Yes.
you're barring the door from someone else, when you're doing harm to someone intentionally, sometimes we make mistakes, and we just have to ask for forgiveness when we do. But when our actions are intentional, as the
And-
Pharisees and Sadducees, God's
And we're-
wrath
yeah.
is very specific.
And it's not just where you just offended them. It's where you've done something or you're doing something that keeps them out of the kingdom.
Because you are doing harm.
You are doing a lot of harm. When they reached the coast of Caesarea Philippi, by the way, there's another Caesarea that's just called Caesarea. It's a coastal port city. Paul likes to go in and out of it later in the book of Acts. This is Caesarea Philippi. It's up in the Herod Phillips
Right.
area.
It's
his prime city. It's his
Right.
main thing. Very pagan, by the way. But when they get there, he goes, we're into verses 13 through 19. It's, who am I? Jesus wants to know who you think I am. He says, who does everybody else think? What have you been hearing? Who out there, what do the people say that I am? Who do the people say that I am? And they respond, John the Baptist, the prophet Isaiah, or Elias rather, Elijah essentially. The prophet Jeremiah, apparently his way of talking was similar to Jeremiah's. Or one of the other prophets. This would be an interesting trick since they were all dead.
But they were
he came back.
referring to what they knew.
Yeah, they were referring back to what they knew. And they were thinking maybe he was one of the prophets. But then he goes, which is close, not quite there, but close. And so he asks them directly, okay, the people aren't really getting it quite yet. Or at least they're not being willing to say it publicly.
Right.
So of my disciples, the ones that I'm actually teaching, who do you say that I am? And Peter, it's always Peter, Peter speaks up.
The boisterous one.
Yeah, the boisterous one, the one that always goes first, the one that always opens his mouth without thinking. In this case, he opens his mouth without thinking and says what's in his heart. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And this is Peter's high water mark as a disciple, as far as I'm concerned. This is his shining moment. This is the most brilliant thing he's ever said as a disciple. It's the one thing he got really right. And by the way, if that's the only thing you ever get right in your life, you're good.
This is true.
if that's the
you
only thing,
accept
if
that-
that's the only thing you understand, and that's the only thing you accept, and that's the only thing you get right in the Bible, you're going to make it.
Correct.
Because and Peter said, you are the Son of the living God. You are my Christ. You are the Christ.
And
You are my
Jesus
Messiah.
said-
And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Peter.
For flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. He knew that had been given to Peter, and that Peter was beginning to have understanding.
It wasn't because of his own understanding. It wasn't because of Peter's...
It was depending on God.
It wasn't Peter's education
No.
and his learning that taught him this.
No.
It wasn't his knowledge of Scripture that taught him this. It was God the Father told him that, revealed it to him. It was a divine revelation.
And he said, and I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And we want to talk about
I do want to talk about
rock.
that, but I do want to back up just a minute and say
Okay.
that in John chapter 6 verse 44, I believe, Jesus says, no one comes to me except the Father which has sent me draws him, and I will raise him up in the last day. No one comes to Jesus. You can speak till you're blue in the face trying to talk to somebody, convince them that Jesus is the Son of God. You can do that all day long. It won't make any difference until God speaks to their heart and reveals it to them.
Right.
No one comes to Jesus except the Father reveals it to them.
But what we can
But we have to tell them.
and we need to reflect it in our lives.
Yes.
And
that's
that
part
reminds
of how
me,
he reveals it.
Yeah, and it reminds me of I think it's there's from my church in Kansas. For those of you in Kansas who watch this, yeehaw. There are many missionaries. There's a number of missionaries they support, and one of them, in one of their travels back, something he said has always stuck with me. They were in Brazil, in the mountains of Brazil, and they were there for 15 years before one man said, "You're different. You don't beat your wife. You don't drink. You don't smoke. You don't do any of these things. What is it that you have?" And when they were able to reach that one man, they didn't do it, but the reflecting God did. God opened the heart, and that one man took that message and just kept going with it.
That's right.
All over the mountains of Brazil. So we don't change the heart, God does, but we do carry a gift.
That's right.
In that message.
And that's also the rest of this, where he says, Peter said, "You're Jesus, you're the Son of God," and he said, "And you're Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Now keep in mind, the word for Peter means little stone. It's Petrus. It means little stone. Rock that I'll build my church on is Petra. It means a huge rock, like the rock of Gibraltar. It's a big foundational, unmovable rock. What he's talking about, he didn't say he was building the foundation on Peter.
No.
Peter is a man like anybody else. He's not going to build his kingdom on a man.
No.
What he built it on was, you know who I am and I know who you are.
He built it on the relationship.
On the relationship that him and Peter had of fully understanding who each other were.
God the Father and God the Son are the foundational rock.
Jesus is the cornerstone.
Yes. And Peter stood on that rock.
That's right.
So it's the cornerstone and the relationship through that to God.
That's right. And in verse 19 it says that, "And I will give unto thee the kingdom of the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Excuse me. "I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever shall be loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Now, I want you to understand, he's not saying that you get to do whatever you want to, and that you can, if you allow murder, as a Christian, if we allow murder, then murder is going to be allowed in heaven. That's not what he's saying.
No.
What he's saying, I believe, what he's saying is, well, you got to look at what keys do. Keys open doors.
Yes.
That's what keys do. Keys open doors. Keys open locks. Keys open chests of understanding. They give access, if you will. Keys give access. And so we have and later he not only says it to Peter, he says it to all the disciples. There's something extremely similar to that. And so we all have this. We are all given the keys. And those keys enable us to either open the door and allow people in and give them access and give them understanding, or to lock the door and to keep them out. Remember the Pharisees? I said I'd be back to this.
This is where we come back.
I was coming back to this. The leaven of the Pharisees locks the door and bars people from entering the kingdom. And
by putting those undue burdens.
But yeah, by doing that undue burden. But see, here's what Jesus said: you have the authority to either let them in or let them out or keep them out. Be careful what you do with your responsibility. Because you will answer.
Yes, we do answer for that.
And he mentions that, by the way, here in a little bit. In a few more verses he mentions it. But I want to go back to one thing I want to mention of him asking, "Who am I?" We all have to answer that question at some time in our lives.
Yes.
We all have to answer, who's Jesus? Because I can tell you the one thing he was not was just a good man.
No.
He was
if
not
he was
just,
only a good man, this is a waste.
Yeah. Well, it's impossible for him to be
True.
Either he was the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, as he claimed to be, or he was a very dangerous, hypocritical teacher.
Yes. And they would have
and got a lot of people killed.
And they would have been able to prove him wrong if it were only a teacher. If he could not live out what and who he said he was, they would have been able to have destroyed him destroyed his ministry and destroyed everyone who tried to follow it.
Yeah. And
And
people have
scattered them if he hadn't been the Son of God.
people try to say, well, he was a good prophet, he was a good teacher. No, he wasn't.
No.
No, he wasn't. He was not just that. Either he was the Son of God, or he was a very dangerous man.
Yes.
But he was not just a good man or just a good teacher.
We've seen in my
And if
lifetime.
you think that he was just a good teacher or a good prophet without being the Son of God, you have not read the Scripture.
In my lifetime, there's been 3 men, I believe, that have created a cults that became so dangerous that they died and were destroyed. Well, yeah, there was the one out of California that went to the jungles, but those were men who somebody thought they were good men and thought they knew who they were, what they were talking about, and yet they caused people to die.
Great harm and a lot of death.
Unjustly.
Yep. And so then, now that they understand who he is, now that we've gotten that out of the way, he starts teaching them in verse 21 through 23. He starts teaching them about, verse 21 says it, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised again on the third day. Remember Jonah, third day.
Okay, right.
So, and then Peter, remember he was at a high mark?
He just has to
He didn't last many verses. This is Peter. He just didn't make it.
But remember, Peter is still reachable.
Peter speaks.
And he still learns, but he gets to that top
He meant well.
and he hits the slide and down he goes.
Peter meant well. This
Yeah,
came
he
out of
did.
his heart. It didn't come out of anything evil. It came out of his love for Jesus.
Yes.
But Satan used that and twisted it. And he said, Peter grabbed him and said, and rebuked Jesus. Can you imagine? Rebuking
No.
Jesus. Rebuked the Son of God. Saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be upon thee. Well, Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. So Peter went from being the rock, being an understanding with Jesus, being things revealed to him by the Father, to being used by Satan in about 5 verses. He didn't make it. Very short time. He didn't make it very far. But that's us. We do this. We get it so right, and we're so excited about getting it right, and then we get it very, very wrong.
But remember, I said early on that God's patience and God's love and God's forgiveness overcomes.
Yeah, he didn't
us.
kick Peter out. He just rebuked him. And what it wasn't rebuking Peter so much. He was rebuking Satan. But
Right.
and here's a dangerous thing. Peter's love for Jesus. Satan was even able to use Peter's love for Jesus to attack Jesus.
To attempt to attack.
And Jesus saw it coming. Jesus understood it, and he rebuked it.
And once again, Satan had to step aside. But remember, he's still trying to stop Jesus because he knows that this is the beginning of the end for him. He will not have authority once Jesus has been the perfect sacrifice.
Yeah,
He's trying to stop it.
He knows exactly who Jesus is.
Oh yeah, and he knows the power of Jesus.
He knew him before he came to this planet. He is very much aware of who he is, and he is very familiar with the Scripture. He knows exactly why Jesus is here.
So we are at
24.
and it says, Jesus said unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.
We learned 24 through 26. We learned the cost of following Jesus. It costs everything.
But
you gain
everything you have right now
means that, and that's what he's saying. It means that it costs you everything, but it means nothing compared to what is awaiting you.
Right. The eternal life, the relationship, and the full blessings that God has for us. You can lose you can lose what you think you're holding on to, and you really don't have anything because what he has to give is so much more.
Because he says, what will it profit you if you, in verse 26ish, what will it profit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? What will you exchange for the price of your soul? What will you change? And what he's talking about was denying yourself and taking up your cross and following him. What he means is to deny your abilities, deny your ambitions, deny your own personal strength. Take up the cross means rely on what
him.
he did.
Yes.
Rely on him. He is the strength. He is your righteousness. He is your everything. And then you follow him. You do what he wanted you to do, not what you wanted to do.
He gives back the gifts. Each one of us has gifts.
Oh, he's given us all gifts.
He gives us back the ability to use those gifts, the joy in those gifts, the everything in those gifts.
But you don't go, I can do this because I am me.
Right.
Because I'm so great.
Right. Losing your soul, I always think of Dante's Inferno, and what that says is, do you want to live repeatedly, moment and day, reliving a horrible point or a horrible thing in your life? Because that can be hell. That would be hell.
And he does say this because, and he's leading up to something. He says, deny yourself, follow me, do what I told you, rely on me, and follow the path that I provide for you. And what will it profit? You know, the whole world doesn't mean anything compared if you lose your soul.
Right.
Because he says in 27, Jesus prophesies here. Jesus says, because the Son of Man shall come back in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. In other words, judgment is coming. At some point, Jesus will return. He will split the eastern sky. The trumpet will sound, and he will come riding back on his white charger, and he will come back as the king. And he will judge his people. Not the world. That comes later. He will come. He's coming to judge us. He's coming to judge his people. And he says, according to their works. How did you run the race? How well did you run the race?
And that can be a fearful thing, and it used to scare me.
And it doesn't need to be.
It's when you allow him
because
to
it says
guide
he's going to
you.
Reward you. It's not about punishment.
What in your faith and in your walk, allow him to guide you. There's going to be times you're going to be walking down a path that looks like it's the darkest, most terrible place, but you are not alone. The gifts you have are going to shine then, and shine because you have let him lead you in that walk and in that path. And people, we have to do this, and we have to do this now.
Right.
Now is the time to stand and let his light flow into us and flow out. And I read a book, it was the writings of actually Mother Teresa when she first got into being a nun, and as she was determining to set up the order that she set up. One of the things that surprised me about it is that Mother Teresa never felt the full peace of God. And it was spoke about, she had a depression. She struggled with that her entire life. But what she said was, it's not me, God. I'm still here at your feet. You show me what to do, and I'm going to do it. What we all saw was God reflecting through her like a beacon.
That's right.
It was coming in her and going out of her so fast that I don't know that she felt it the way that we saw it. But she never lost hope, even though she sometimes felt that she was as far away from God as she could be. But she said, you got me on this path, and I'm going to stay the course.
That's right.
Stay the course.
And she stayed her course. She denied herself, took up her cross,
and stayed the course.
Jesus, and stayed the course that he put her on. And Jesus, and I get excited about it. I get excited, and it comes off a little harsh sometimes about Jesus coming and judgment coming. In this case, I like to describe this particular judging as a horse race.
Okay.
And that doesn't sound very flattering, but let me explain. Every horse in the race is a horse. And so when you judge a horse race, you aren't judging whether they're a horse or not. You're judging how well they ran the race. Jesus is not judging you on will not be coming back to judge on whether you're a Christian or not,
because at that point he's
if you're
a Christian.
if you're in this judgment, you are a Christian. You made it to heaven. What he's judging, he's not judging whether you're a Christian or not. He judges whether how well you ran the race. How well did you do what you were supposed to do? How well did you deal with the talents he gave you? Did you utilize your talents and gifts as he presented them for you to do? Did you follow the calling he gave you, if he gave you one? If he gave you a specific
And you pray
one.
for that. Lord, guide me, show me.
Absolutely.
What am I supposed to do?
Because he's coming.
Listen for him to answer you.
Yeah, to listen. Don't just spend all the time praying, talking. Actually listen. Meditate
He
upon the
will.
Lord and let him talk to you.
He says that what I do, and it's something I do. I admit, he sees it and has pointed it out to me more. There are times when we've just been somewhere and I see God tells me to look a certain direction, and I do.
Absolutely.
And he says, go there. And there's usually a person there. One person.
One.
Just one. And I talk to that person, and there's something we can do for that person, and that's what we do. I wasn't even praying about it. I wasn't even totally thinking about it. But I heard him say, look. And I looked. Listen and look. When he tells you to look, look.
Yep.
If
Go
he
about your life listening to
tells
Christ.
you to walk over to somebody, he's got a reason for it. Just trust him in it. Just do it.
Yep. Listen for his voice. It is, once you've heard it, it's unmistakable.
This is true.
And verse 28, I like verse 28, it says, Verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming into the kingdom. Coming in his kingdom.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know John lived the longest. John lived to be an old man of the disciples. Now, keep in mind, the disciples weren't the only ones standing there.
No.
The 12 weren't the only ones standing there. There was more. But John lived, and through his revelation that he was shown, he saw Jesus in heaven. He saw him coming back. He saw him in his kingdom. He saw him on his throne. And so he didn't die until he saw it. Now, there's another one that may have been in the room, that may have been present. Stephen.
Probably.
Stephen saw Jesus at the right hand of the Father before he died.
Yes, he did.
Now, he was currently being stoned because he preached and they didn't like what he said, and so they stoned him. But before he died, he saw Jesus at the right hand of the Father. And he asked Jesus not to count this stoning against them, not to count what they were doing against them.
Right.
Just as Jesus did from the cross, said, don't count this against them. Because they don't know what they're doing.
There's a lot of anger, pain, and emptiness in people's lives right now. And right now it's coming across in this world, in this country, so many ways. Sometimes the anger that comes out is because of the emptiness people feel. We can bring a light.
We have the keys.
To that emptiness. And that's what we're supposed to do.
We have the keys to the light that they need, to the knowledge and the understanding that they need. We carry those keys. We have that access. We have the ability to show them and to teach them. And if we all go out there and do that, then there will be a little less hate in the world, a little less darkness, and a little more light.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
That's chapter 16. All right.
Amen.